The city was a symphony of indifferent noise, a sprawling beast of concrete and glass that rarely noticed the quiet struggles of the people who kept its heart beating. Arthur Vance was one of those people. A janitor, a single father, a man whose world had shrunk to the size of a one-bedroom apartment and the boundless universe within his daughter's eyes. His hands, calloused from mops and harsh chemicals, were gentle when they held 6-year-old Lily's. His back, often aching from long hours on his feet, was always strong enough to carry her when her little legs grew tired. He wore his poverty like a well-worn coat, not with shame, but with the quiet resignation of a man who had learned to weather the cold. Tonight, the cold was biting, both in the late autumn air that whipped through the downtown canyons and in the gnawing emptiness of his stomach. It was the 29th of the month, a desolate no-man's land between paychecks. In his pocket, wrapped in a thin napkin, was his dinner, a single, slightly stale bread roll and a small wedge of cheese he'd been saving. It was his last meal until tomorrow's shift, where he hoped a kindly cook in the office cafeteria might slip him some leftovers. Lily was safe at their neighbors, fed and warm, and for that, Arthur was profoundly grateful. That gratitude was the only thing filling his stomach as he walked the long way home through the city park, hoping the fading light and the rustle of leaves might distract him from his hunger. He saw them from a distance, a tableau of silent misery on a park bench. A woman, elegantly dressed in a dark wool coat that spoke of a world far from his own, sat stiffly, her gaze fixed on some unseen point of despair. Beside her, a small boy, no older than Lily, was crying. It wasn't the loud, tantrum-fueled crying of a spoiled child, but a series of quiet, hiccuping sobs that seemed to shake his entire small frame. They were the sounds of a deep and genuine sorrow, the kind a child should never know. Arthur's feet slowed. He should keep walking. It was not his business. The city taught you to build walls, to mind your own space, to look away. But he couldn't. He was a father. And in the boy's desolate weeping, he heard an echo of every fear he'd ever had for Lily. The fear of her being hungry, of her being sad, of him being unable to fix it. He hesitated for only a moment, his hand touching the small, precious bundle in his pocket. It was his last meal. His stomach clenched in protest. But then he looked at the boy again, whose shoulders were trembling, and the hunger in his own belly felt insignificant. He walked over, his worn work boots making soft sounds on the pavement. The woman didn't look up, lost in her own storm. "Excuse me," Arthur said, his voice soft, so as not to startle them. The woman flinched, her head snapping up. Her eyes were stunning, a deep, stormy gray, but they were hollow, shadowed with an exhaustion that seemed bone-deep. She looked at his janitor's uniform, at his tired face, and a flicker of fear crossed her features before settling into weary caution. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice clipped in tight. Her hand moved instinctively to shield her son. "I don't mean any harm," Arthur said quickly, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. He knelt, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "Hey there, little man. What's wrong?" The boy, whose hair was the color of dark honey, just sobbed harder, burying his face in his mother's expensive coat. "He's just having a difficult day," the woman said, her voice wavering slightly. Arthur nodded, his gaze filled with an understanding that transcended their different worlds. He knew a difficult day. He lived them. "I know the feeling," he said gently. He looked from the boy's tear-streaked face to the mother's desolate eyes. "Sometimes," he said, speaking more to the boy but intending the words for them both, "a little something to eat can make a difficult day feel a little bit better." He reached into his pocket and slowly, reverently, unwrapped his dinner. The bread roll wasn't much, but it was all he had. The cheese was a small, pale square. He held it out to the boy. "It's not much," he said, a faint, apologetic smile on his face. "But it's good. I was saving it for myself, so I can promise you it's the best roll in the whole city." The boy stopped crying. He peeked out from behind his mother's arm, his big, brown eyes, red-rimmed and wet with tears, fixing on the simple offering. His mother, Eleonora, stared at the food, then at Arthur's face. She saw the lines of fatigue etched around his eyes, the worn collar of his shirt. She saw his sincerity, a pure, unvarnished kindness that was so rare it felt like a mirage. "No, we couldn't possibly," she started, her voice choked with a sudden, sharp emotion. You don't have to do that. I want to. Arthur insisted, his gaze unwavering. He looked directly at her, and for the first time, he really saw the person, not the circumstance. He saw a mother in pain. I have a little girl, and I know I'd want someone to be kind to her if she was crying. He nudged the roll a little closer to the boy. Go on, he whispered. It'll help. Slowly, hesitantly, the little boy, Leo, reached out a small hand and took the bread roll. His fingers were so clean, his nails perfectly trimmed. He looked at his mother for permission. She was speechless, a war of emotions playing across her face. Shock, gratitude, a profound and unsettling shame. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Leo took a small bite, then another. The hiccuping sobs subsided, replaced by the small, focused sounds of a child eating. He broke off a piece of cheese and ate that, too. A fragile piece settled over the park bench, broken only by the city's distant hum and a child's quiet chewing. Arthur stood up, a sense of rightness settling in his chest, pushing aside the hunger. You have a good evening, he said, turning to leave. Wait, the woman called out, her voice stronger now. He turned back. She was fumbling in a sleek, leather handbag. Please, let me pay you for that. For your kindness. She pulled out a wallet, and from it, a crisp $100 bill. To Arthur, it looked like a king's ransom. But accepting it would curdle the act, turn it from a gift into a transaction. It would cheapen the simple, human connection they had just shared. He shook his head, a gentle but firm refusal. No, ma'am, he said. That's not necessary. Kindness shouldn't have a price tag. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and the walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart began to tremble. In his refusal, there was a dignity more profound than any fortune. But it was your dinner, she stammered, the $100 bill looking absurd in her hand. You're hungry. Arthur just smiled, a genuine, tired smile that reached his eyes. My daughter is fed and warm at home. That's all the food I need tonight, he said. You just make sure he's okay. He glanced at the boy, who was now calmly finishing the last of the roll. He has kind eyes. And with that, Arthur Vance, the janitor with an empty stomach and a full heart, turned and walked away into the growing dusk, leaving behind a billionaire who had just been given a lesson in wealth that no business school could ever teach. Eleanora Sterling sat frozen on the bench, the crisp bill still in her hand, feeling as flimsy and useless as a piece of paper in a hurricane. For the first time in a very long time, she felt poor. Eleanora watched the janitor's retreating figure until he was just a silhouette swallowed by the city's twilight. The $100 bill in her hand felt like an accusation. She, Eleanora Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, a woman who could buy entire city blocks without a thought, had been unable to soothe her own grieving child. Her son, Leo, had been crying for his father, a grief so immense and heavy that her world of private jets, sprawling estates, and limitless resources felt like a cold, empty cage. She could give him anything he wanted, except the one thing he needed: comfort. And then this man, this stranger with tired eyes and worn-out boots, had walked out of the dusk and offered it so freely. He had given away his own meal, an act of such simple, profound generosity that it sliced through the layers of numbness she had wrapped around herself since her husband, Richard, had passed away a year ago. She looked down at Leo. He was no longer crying. He was licking the last of the cheese from his fingertips, his expression calm for the first time all day. He looked up at her, his brown eyes clear. That man was nice, Mommy, he said, his small voice cutting through the turmoil in her mind. Yes, Leo, she whispered, her voice thick. He was. She crumpled the useless bill in her fist and tucked it back into her purse. It wasn't about the money. He had made that painfully clear. His refusal was not an act of pride, but of principle. Kindness shouldn't have a price tag. The words echoed in her mind, a stark contrast to the world she inhabited, where everything and everyone had a value, a cost, a bottom line. She had tried to pay him, to turn his grace into a service rendered, and he had gently, irrevocably, refused to let her. He had seen her not as a potential opportunity, but as a fellow human, a mother with a sad child. He saw the person, not the circumstance. The realization was both humbling and deeply unsettling. As her driver, a silent man named Thomas, pulled the gleaming Blacktown car to the curb, she felt a pang of shame. Her life was a fortress of convenience, designed to shield her from the grit and reality of the world. But it had also isolated her, locking her in an echo chamber of wealth and solitude. She and Leo got into the plush leather interior, the door closing with a soft, expensive thud, sealing them off from the world once more. But this time, the silence inside the car felt different. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. That night, in her cavernous, art-filled mansion that overlooked the city lights, Eleonora couldn't sleep. The janitor's face haunted her, the quiet dignity in his eyes, the genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his mouth. He had given her son his last meal and walked away hungry, sustained only by the knowledge that his own child was fed. The thought was a physical ache in her chest. She had spent the last year managing a global empire, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and billions of dollars. But she had forgotten the simple currency of human decency. The next morning, Eleonora made a decision. She couldn't let it go. It felt fundamentally wrong that such an act of goodness should go unacknowledged, not with money, but with something more. Gratitude. Recognition. She wanted to see him again, to thank him properly. But she didn't know his name. She didn't know anything about him, except that he was a janitor, he had a daughter, and he worked somewhere downtown. For anyone else, it would be an impossible task. For Eleonora Sterling, it was a matter of will. She called the head of her personal security, a former intelligence officer named Marcus. She described the man in detail, his approximate height, his tired but kind eyes, the faded blue janitorial uniform, the location in the park, the time of the encounter. "I want to find him," she said, her voice firm. Discreetly. No intimidation. "I just want to know who he is." Marcus, accustomed to requests for corporate espionage and high-level background checks, was momentarily taken aback by the simplicity and personal nature of the request. But he simply replied, "Of course, Mrs. Sterling." The search began. It was a strange juxtaposition of power and purpose. Eleonora sat in her sterile, glass-walled office atop the Sterling Tower, orchestrating multi-million-dollar deals, while a team of highly trained professionals scoured security camera footage from park perimeters and traffic lights, looking for a man in a janitor's uniform. They cross-referenced cleaning companies contracted to buildings in the area. They narrowed it down to 3 possibilities. By the end of the day, Marcus had an answer. "His name is Arthur Vance," he reported, standing before her desk. "He's a single father. His daughter's name is Lily. He works for a commercial cleaning service, and his current assignment is the night shift at the old Hawthorne building, 3 blocks from the park." Eleonora felt a wave of relief so potent it surprised her. She had a name. Arthur Vance. It was a good, solid name. It fit the man she had met. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. "That will be all." That evening, she didn't go straight home. She had Thomas drive her to the Hawthorne building, a handsome but aging Art Deco structure. She told him to wait. She got out of the car, her expensive heels clicking on the pavement, feeling a nervousness she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't Eleonora Sterling, the titan of industry. She was just Leo's mom, about to approach a man who had shown her a kindness she couldn't forget. She walked into the grand but dimly lit lobby. It was empty, save for the rhythmic squeak of a mop against marble. She followed the sound down a long corridor and saw him. Arthur. He was pushing a large bucket, his back to her, mopping the floor with a practiced, efficient rhythm. He was humming a soft, tuneless melody. She watched him for a moment. This man who had no idea that the woman whose life he had briefly touched was now standing just a few feet away. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Mr. Vance." Arthur stopped, turning around in surprise. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized her. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. "Ma'am," he said, a hint of confusion in his voice. "From the park. Is your boy all right?" The first thing he asked about was her son. The thought warmed her more than she could say. "He is," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "He's much better. Thanks to you. My name is Eleonora." She extended a hand. He hesitated, looking at his own damp, calloused hand before quickly wiping it again on the rag and shaking hers. His grip was firm, his hand rough against her smooth one. "Arthur," he said, "it's nice to put a name to the face. I'm glad your son is feeling better." "I wanted to thank you again," Eleonora said, her voice earnest. "What you did, it meant a great deal." More than you know. Anyone would have done the same, he demurred, looking slightly uncomfortable with the praise. No, she said, her gaze steady. They wouldn't have. I live in a world where most people wouldn't even have noticed. You did. An awkward silence fell between them, the only sound the hum of the building's ventilation system. He was a janitor on his shift. She was a woman in a designer coat, standing in his workspace. The chasm between their lives felt a mile wide. She had to bridge it. You mentioned you have a daughter, she said, changing the subject. Arthur's face instantly softened, the weariness in his eyes replaced by a bright, shining love. Lily, he said, the name itself a prayer. She's my whole world. I'd like to meet her sometime. Eleonora found herself saying, the words surprising even herself. And I'd like for Leo to meet her, and for him to thank you himself. Arthur looked taken aback, but a slow smile spread across his face. I think she'd like that, he said. She loves making new friends. They made a plan, a simple, tentative arrangement to meet at that same park on Saturday. As Eleonora walked back to her car, the cold marble of the lobby felt less imposing. She had found him, and in doing so, she felt like she had found a small, flickering light in the vast darkness of her own loneliness. The park on Saturday was a different creature than it had been on that gloomy weekday evening. It was alive with the cheerful chaos of weekend families. Sunlight, crisp and golden, filtered through the autumn leaves, painting the world in shades of amber and rust. Arthur and Lily arrived first. Lily, her hand tucked securely in her father's, was a whirlwind of energy, her bright pink jacket a splash of joy against the muted fall colors. She chattered excitedly, pointing out squirrels and dogs and funny-shaped clouds. Arthur watched her, his heart swelling with a love so fierce it was almost painful. She was the reason for every sacrifice, the balm for every hardship. He felt a little nervous about the meeting. He wasn't sure why this woman, Eleonora, wanted to see him again. People from her world didn't usually seek out people from his, unless it was to complain about a smudged window. But there had been a sincerity in her eyes, a genuine gratitude that had convinced him to agree. He just hoped Lily would be on her best behavior. Then he saw them. Eleonora and Leo were walking towards their bench. Today, Eleonora was dressed more casually, in well-fitting jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, but she still carried an aura of quiet elegance. Leo was holding her hand, looking small and a little shy. As they got closer, Lily, with the uninhibited curiosity of a child, let go of Arthur's hand and ran a few steps forward. Hi, she said, her voice bright and clear. Are you the crying boy? Arthur's face flushed with embarrassment. Lily, he chided gently. But Eleonora laughed, a real, unburdened sound that surprised him. It was a beautiful sound. Yes, he is, she said, smiling down at her son. But he's not crying today. This is Leo. And I'm Eleonora. Leo ducked his head, but he managed a small hi in return. Lily, undeterred by his shyness, beamed at him. I'm Lily. Do you want to see the slide? It's the fastest one in the whole park. Daddy timed me. Before the adults could even respond, Lily had gently taken a stunned Leo by the hand and was pulling him towards the playground. Is that okay? She called back over her shoulder. Eleonora looked at Arthur, a mixture of amusement and relief in her eyes. I think that's more than okay, she said. They watched as Lily, the confident little leader, showed Leo how to climb the ladder. Within minutes, the sound of their shared laughter drifted back to the bench. Leo, the quiet, withdrawn boy from the other night, was squealing with delight as he came down the slide. She's amazing, Eleonora said, her voice soft with wonder. She's my Lily, Arthur said simply, as if that explained everything. They sat on the bench, a comfortable silence settling between them as they watched their children play. It was strange, Arthur thought, how natural it felt. They were from two different universes, yet here they were, united by the common language of parenthood. I'm sorry about the other night, Eleonora said suddenly, turning to him. My son, his father passed away last year. Sometimes the grief just hits him, and I don't know what to do. She spoke the words quietly, a confession she rarely made. But with this man, this kind janitor, it felt safe. Arthur's heart went out to her. He knew loss. He had lost his wife, Lily's mother, to an illness not long after Lily was born. He understood the gaping hole it left, the phantom limb of a life that was no more. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice filled with genuine empathy. I lost my wife a few years back. I know it's not the same, but I get it. The feeling of being lost. The way you have to be strong for them, even when you're falling apart inside. Eleonora looked at him, her stormy gray eyes wide with surprise. She had assumed he was divorced or had been left. She hadn't considered that he, too, was navigating the lonely waters of grief. In that moment, the gap between them narrowed even more. They weren't a billionaire and a janitor. They were a widower and a widow, two single parents trying to do their best. They talked for over an hour. He spoke of the constant financial worry, the fear of not being able to provide for Lily, but also of the immense joy she brought him, the way her laughter could make their tiny apartment feel like a palace. She spoke of the crushing loneliness of her life, the pressure of her responsibilities, and how her wealth had become a barrier, isolating her from genuine connection. She didn't mention the scale of her wealth, and he didn't ask. He assumed she was comfortably well off, maybe a lawyer or an executive, nothing more. The dramatic irony was thick in the air, but the emotions being shared were real and raw. He saw a woman struggling with a pain he understood. She saw a man of incredible character and resilience. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower, they called the children, who were now firm friends, their hands sticky from a shared treat Arthur had bought them with the few dollars he had. Can we see Lily again? Leo asked his mother on the walk back to her car, his voice hopeful. Please. I'd like that very much, Eleonora said, her eyes meeting Arthur's over their children's heads. They exchanged phone numbers, a modern ritual that felt surprisingly momentous. As Arthur and Lily walked home, Lily chattered on about her new friend Leo. But Arthur was quiet, his mind replaying the conversation. He had felt a connection with Eleonora, a spark of understanding that he hadn't felt with anyone in a very long time. It was a dangerous feeling. Hope. It was a fragile and terrifying thing for a man who had learned to expect so little. He told himself it was just a friendship, a brief intersection of two very different paths. But as he unlocked the door to his small apartment, the world felt a little less cold, a little less lonely than it had before. A bridge was being built, plank by plank, across the chasm of their differences, forged not from steel or stone, but from shared grief, parental love, and the innocent laughter of their children. The Saturdays in the park became a ritual. Each week, the four of them would meet, and the fragile bridge between their worlds grew stronger. The children, Lily and Leo, were the chief engineers of this connection. Their friendship was simple and immediate, unburdened by the complexities of their parents' lives. They didn't see a rich boy and a poor girl. They saw a playmate, a co-conspirator, a friend. Lily's boisterous confidence drew Leo out of his shell, while Leo's gentle nature seemed to temper Lily's wilder impulses. They were a perfect, complementary pair. For Arthur and Eleonora, the conversations on the park bench became an oasis in their respective weeks. They talked about everything and nothing, the challenges of getting a child to eat vegetables, the funny things they said, the quiet fears that crept in late at night. Arthur found himself looking forward to these talks with an eagerness that both thrilled and scared him. He was starting to care for this woman, this elegant, sad-eyed mother who seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. One chilly afternoon, as a light rain began to fall, Arthur made a spontaneous decision. We can't stay here, he said, zipping up Lily's jacket. Why don't you? Why don't you both come back to our place? It's not much, but it's warm. I can make some grilled cheese. Eleonora hesitated. She was used to manicured homes, to spaces designed by architects and filled with priceless art. The idea of stepping into his world was intimidating. But then she looked at Leo, whose face was alight with the possibility of extending his playtime with Lily, and she saw the open, honest invitation in Arthur's eyes. We'd love that, she said, her voice genuine. The walk to Arthur's apartment building was a lesson in humility for Eleonora. It was a tired, brick building with a temperamental elevator and hallways that smelled of stale cooking and disinfectant. Yet, when Arthur unlocked the door to his apartment, what she found inside was not what she expected. It was tiny, yes. The main room served as a living room, dining room, and kitchen all in one. The furniture was old and mismatched, the sofa springs groaning in protest as they sat. But it was spotlessly clean. And more than that, it was filled with love. Lily's colorful drawings were taped all over the refrigerator. A lopsided clay pot she'd made, holding a single, cheerful daisy, sat on the windowsill. The small space was overflowing with the evidence of a happy childhood. It felt more like a home than her sprawling, silent mansion ever did. Arthur moved around the small kitchen with an easy grace, pulling out bread, butter, and cheese. The children sat at the small, wobbly table, their heads bent together over a coloring book Lily had produced. The apartment was soon filled with the delicious, comforting smell of melting cheese and toasted bread. As they ate this simple meal, the best grilled cheese Eleonora had ever tasted, she watched Arthur interact with his daughter. He listened to her stories with rapt attention. He ruffled her hair. He praised her coloring. The love between them was a tangible thing, a warm, glowing light that filled every corner of the cramped room. It was a wealth she couldn't buy, a richness she craved with every fiber of her being. The visit to Arthur's world was a turning point. A few weeks later, Eleonora decided to reciprocate, though she did so with careful consideration. She knew inviting them to her mansion would be too much, a shocking reveal that would shatter the delicate balance of their budding friendship. So she chose a neutral, yet telling, location. "I know a place," she told Arthur one day. "A private garden. It's very quiet. The children could run around without us having to worry." Arthur agreed, intrigued. The private garden turned out to be the rooftop conservatory of a skyscraper owned by her company. It was a breathtaking glass atrium filled with exotic plants, winding stone paths, and a small waterfall that trickled into a koi pond. The view of the city below was spectacular. Lily and Leo were ecstatic, chasing each other through the miniature jungle with shrieks of joy. Arthur, however, was stunned into silence. He looked at the lush greenery, the panoramic view, the sheer opulence of the hidden paradise. "Eleonora," he said, his voice quiet. "This is incredible. How did you get us in here?" Eleonora's heart pounded. This was a test. "A friend of my late husband's owns the building," she said, a carefully constructed half-truth. "He lets us use it sometimes." Arthur accepted the explanation, but a seed of awareness had been planted. He started noticing other things. The way she never looked at a price when she bought the children ice cream. The fine, soft wool of her coat. The quiet, authoritative way she spoke, which commanded respect without ever raising her voice. He pieced together an image of a woman who was, at the very least, very wealthy. But strangely, it didn't matter as much as he thought it would, because by now he knew her. He knew the sadness in her eyes and the easy way she laughed. He knew she was a devoted mother and a kind, thoughtful person. He was falling for Eleonora the woman, not for the vague, shimmering outline of her wealth. He saw the person, not the circumstance. Their bond deepened, moving beyond the shared ground of parenthood into something more personal, more intimate. They started talking on the phone during the week. He would call her after his shift, his voice tired but happy to hear hers. She would call him during a quiet moment in her chaotic day, his calm, steady presence a welcome anchor. They were building a life, or at least the blueprint of one, in these stolen moments. The children were the foundation. One evening, as Arthur was tucking Lily into bed, she looked up at him with her serious, dark eyes. "Daddy," she said, "is Eleonora your girlfriend?" Arthur was taken aback. "No, sweetie. We're just friends." "But you like her," Lily stated, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. "And I like Leo. We could be a family. Leo said he wishes you were his daddy, 'cause you know how to make the best grilled cheese." The innocent, profound words of a child struck Arthur right in the heart. A family. The thought was both terrifying and beautiful. He was a janitor. She was something else entirely. It was impossible. It was a fantasy. But as he sat in the quiet of his apartment that night, the idea took root. A found family, pieced together from the broken parts of their lives. It was a fragile, hopeful dream, blooming in the space between two vastly different worlds. He didn't know that dream, and the lives it encompassed, was about to be tested by a storm he could never have seen coming. The fragile peace of their burgeoning world was shattered on a Tuesday. It started with a cough. Lily had been a little listless all day, her usual vibrant energy dimmed. Arthur thought it was just a common cold, something a good night's sleep would fix. He tucked her into bed, gave her a kiss on her warm forehead, and left for his night shift with a nagging sense of worry. The call came just after midnight. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Gable, her voice frantic. "Arthur, You need to come home. It's Lily. She can't breathe. A cold dread, sharper and more terrifying than any hunger he had ever known, seized him. He dropped his mop, mumbled a panicked apology to his supervisor, and ran. He ran the 10 blocks back to his apartment, his lungs burning, his heart hammering against his ribs with a frantic, desperate rhythm. When he burst through the door, the sight that greeted him would be seared into his memory forever. Lily was sitting on the sofa, her small body rigid with effort, her face pale and tinged with blue. She was making a horrifying, wheezing sound with every ragged breath she tried to take. It was a severe asthma attack, far worse than the mild ones she'd had as a toddler. Mrs. Gable was on the phone with 911. Arthur scooped his daughter into his arms, whispering her name over and over, his own panic a useless, roaring thing in his ears. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights and the hiss of an oxygen mask. At the hospital, a swarm of doctors and nurses descended, whisking Lily away into the emergency room, leaving Arthur alone in a sterile, white corridor, his hands shaking, his mind numb with terror. The hours that followed were a form of torture. He paced the hallway, the smell of antiseptic burning his nostrils. He tried to pray, but the only words that came to his mind were, "Please, please, please." He felt utterly and completely helpless. He was a man who fixed things with his hands, who solved problems with hard work and perseverance. But this was a battle being fought on a microscopic level in his daughter's lungs, and he was just a spectator. Finally, a doctor came out. He was a kind-faced man with tired eyes. "Mr. Vance," he said gently, "we've stabilized her. The attack was severe, but she's responding to the treatment. We'd like to keep her for a few days for observation." Relief, so potent it made his knees weak, washed over Arthur. He sagged against the wall, tears he hadn't realized he was holding back streaming down his face. "Can I see her?" "In a little while. We're moving her up to the pediatric ward." The doctor paused, his expression shifting from medical professional to something more somber. "Mr. Vance, we need to discuss something else. When we were processing your admission paperwork, there seems to be an issue with your insurance." Arthur's blood ran cold again. "An issue? What kind of issue?" "Your policy has a very high deductible," the doctor explained, his voice full of practiced sympathy. "And it doesn't cover extended hospital stays or some of the specialized treatments Lily requires. The initial estimate for her care is substantial." The doctor named a figure that made the air leave Arthur's lungs. It was more money than he made in a year. In 5 years. It was an impossible, insurmountable number. The relief he had felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by a crushing, suffocating weight. He was going to be buried in debt for the rest of his life. How could he possibly pay it? He would lose everything. The apartment. Everything he had worked so hard to hold together. He felt like a failure. A complete and utter failure as a father. His job was to protect his daughter, and he couldn't even provide her with the basic security of healthcare. He sat on a hard plastic chair in the waiting room, his head in his hands, the doctor's words echoing in his ears. The crisis wasn't just medical. It was financial, and it threatened to destroy the small, fragile life he had built for them. He didn't know who to turn to. His world was small. He had no family to call on, no savings to speak of. And then he thought of Eleonora. He hesitated. Their friendship was new, and it was built on a careful balance. This was too much. It was a burden he couldn't possibly ask her to share. But he was drowning, and he was so alone. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone. He wouldn't ask for money. He wouldn't even hint at it. He just needed to hear a friendly voice. He needed to tell someone who cared that his daughter was sick and he was terrified. He scrolled to her name and pressed call. "Arthur." Eleonora's voice was clear and awake, even though it was the middle of the night. "Is everything okay?" "No," he choked out, the word breaking on a sob he could no longer contain. "It's Lily. She's in the hospital." He explained what happened, his voice thick with fear and exhaustion, carefully omitting the part about the catastrophic bill. He just needed a friend. He had no idea that the friend he was calling had the power to move mountains, and that she was about to do just that. For him. For Lily. The storm had hit, and it was about to change everything. Eleonora listened on the other end of the line, her heart clenching with every word Arthur spoke. She sat up in her massive, empty bed, the silk sheets feeling cold and foreign against her skin. She could hear the raw terror in his voice. the sound of a strong man utterly broken by fear for his child. All the trappings of her wealth, the silent mansion, the city lights twinkling below her window, faded into insignificance. All that mattered was the pain of the man who had become her friend and the danger his daughter was in. "Which hospital, Arthur?" she asked, her voice calm and steady, a deliberate counterpoint to his panic. She was already out of bed, pulling on clothes, her mind shifting into the decisive, efficient mode that had built her empire. "St. Jude's General," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm on my way. Don't move. I'll be there soon." Before he could protest, she hung up. She didn't call her driver. She grabbed her keys and went to the garage herself, choosing a discreet, unassuming sedan over her usual town car. As she drove through the deserted city streets, her mind was a whirlwind of activity. St. Jude's General was a public hospital, competent but often under-resourced. Lily needed the best. No compromises. She made a call, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Dr. Alastair Finch, please. This is Eleanora Sterling." "Yes, I know what time it is. Wake him up." Dr. Finch was the country's leading pediatric pulmonologist. He was also the head of the children's wing at the Sterling Foundation Medical Center, a state-of-the-art facility she had funded. Within minutes, she was arranging for Lily's immediate transfer. She made another call, this one to the administrator of St. Jude's. "This is Eleanora Sterling," she said, the name a key that unlocked any door. "I am taking over financial responsibility for a patient in your pediatric emergency care, a little girl named Lily Vance. I am also arranging her transfer to the Sterling Medical Center. Have all her paperwork ready." When Eleanora arrived at St. Jude's, she found Arthur exactly where she had left him on the phone, slumped in a waiting room chair, looking small and defeated under the harsh fluorescent lights. He looked up as she approached, his eyes red-rimmed and full of a despair that tore at her heart. "Eleanora," he breathed, surprised to see her. "You didn't have to come." "Of course I did," she said softly, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're my friend." Just then, a team of medics arrived with a specialized transport gurney, led by a calm, confident-looking doctor. "Mr. Vance," the doctor said. "I'm Dr. Evans. We're here to transfer Lily to the Sterling Medical Center. Dr. Alastair Finch is waiting for her." Arthur stared at them, his face a mask of confusion. "The Sterling Center? I don't understand. I can't afford that. Who authorized this?" The doctor glanced at Eleanora. "All arrangements have been taken care of, sir. Our only concern right now is your daughter's health." Arthur's gaze shifted to Eleanora, a dawning, bewildered question in his eyes. She had done this. But how? The name, the Sterling Medical Center, pricked at his consciousness. He'd seen it on the news. It was a place for the ultra-rich, a beacon of modern medicine funded by some reclusive billionaire. "Eleanora," he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What's going on?" "We'll talk later, Arthur," she said gently. "Let's just get Lily settled." He was too exhausted and overwhelmed to argue. He followed them as they prepared Lily for the transfer. He saw his daughter, small and fragile in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, but her breathing was already less labored. He rode in the ambulance with Eleanora, the silence between them thick with unspoken questions. The Sterling Foundation Medical Center was like another world. It was less like a hospital and more like a five-star hotel, with serene, art-filled hallways, private rooms with sweeping city views, and an air of quiet, expensive competence. Lily was swept away by a team of experts led by the legendary Dr. Finch himself, who spoke to Arthur with kindness and reassurance, explaining every step of the treatment plan. Arthur was shown to a private suite attached to Lily's room, complete with a comfortable bed, a shower, and a small kitchen stocked with food. It was all too much. It didn't make sense. After Lily was settled and sleeping peacefully under the watchful eye of a private nurse, Eleanora found Arthur standing by the large window, staring out at the city. "She's going to be okay, Arthur," Eleanora said softly from the doorway. He turned to face her, his expression a mixture of gratitude, awe, and profound confusion. "I don't understand any of this," he said, his voice raw. "The best doctor in the country. This place, it must cost a fortune. You said a friend of your husband's owned a building, but this is different. The Sterling Center. Eleanora, who are you?" The moment had come. The truth which she had so carefully guarded, could no longer be contained. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She was more afraid of his reaction than she had been of any boardroom takeover. "My late husband's name was Richard Sterling," she said quietly. "He founded Sterling Industries. After he passed away, I took over as CEO." She watched his face as the pieces clicked into place. Sterling Industries, the Sterling Foundation, Sterling Medical Center, Eleanora Sterling. The name was everywhere, a symbol of immense, unimaginable wealth and power. It was the name on the side of the tower where she had taken him to the rooftop garden. He stared at her, his mind reeling. The kind, lonely mother from the park. The woman he had shared grilled cheese with in his tiny apartment. The friend he had come to care for so deeply. She was a billionaire. One of the richest, most powerful people in the country. He felt a chasm open up beneath his feet, a vast, dizzying canyon that separated their two worlds. The bridge they had so carefully built seemed to crumble into dust. He wasn't her friend. He was her charity case. The thought was a bitter pill. He took a step back, away from her, the movement involuntary, a reflex of a man who suddenly felt like he was in a place he didn't belong. "A billionaire," he whispered, the words sounding foreign and absurd. He looked around the luxurious room, at the evidence of her power, and then back at her. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cool, shuttered look of shock and something else. Something that looked a lot like betrayal. The revelation hung in the air of the pristine hospital suite, heavy and suffocating. Arthur stared at Eleanora, but he wasn't seeing the woman he thought he knew. He was seeing a stranger, an architect of a grand deception. Every shared moment, every quiet conversation, was now cast in a new, harsh light. The casual clothes, the simple meetings in the park, the half-truth about the rooftop garden, it all felt like a carefully constructed charade. "Why?" he asked, his voice flat and hollow. It was the only word he could manage. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to," Eleanora said, her voice pleading. She took a step towards him, but he flinched, and she froze. At first it was, "I don't know. You were the first person in so long who didn't see the money. You just saw a mother with a crying child. You treated me like a person. It was a gift. I didn't want to lose that." "Lose that?" Arthur let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "So you lied to me instead? You let me invite you into my home. You let me talk about my struggles, my fears about money. All while you could probably buy the entire block my apartment is on without even noticing?" The injustice of it stung him, a deep, personal wound. He felt like a fool, like a bug under a microscope, a subject in some rich woman's social experiment. Was I a project, Eleanora? A little slice of authentic poverty to make you feel better about your life? "No," she cried, the words sharp with pain. "Never. Arthur, please. You have to believe me. It wasn't like that. Our friendship, it's real. It's the realest thing I've had in my life since Richard died." "Friendship," he shot back, his voice rising. "Friendship is built on honesty, on trust. I told you everything about my life, my deepest fears. And you? You told me nothing. You hid the single most important fact about yourself." He gestured wildly around the luxurious room. This changes everything. I'm not your friend. I'm your charity case. The poor janitor you saved. Is that how you see me?" His pride, the one thing he had always held on to, was shattered. He had built his life on the principle of self-reliance, of earning his own way. To have his daughter's life saved by a secret billionaire felt like a negation of everything he was. It made him feel small, powerless. He turned away from her, unable to look at her face. He walked back to the window, his back a rigid wall of hurt and anger. "I can't do this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I appreciate what you've done for Lily. More than you'll ever know. I will find a way to pay you back. Every single cent. But I can't. We can't be friends." Eleanora felt as though he had physically struck her. The words, "pay you back," were like daggers. He was trying to turn her act of love back into a transaction, the very thing she had been so moved by when he refused her money in the park. He was pushing her away, putting up the same walls of pride and class that she had been so relieved to see him ignore before. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and blurring her vision. "Pay me back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Arthur, this isn't about money. It was never about money. It's about Lily. It's about you. I care about you." "How can I believe that?" he said, his voice rough. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. She had to make him understand. She had to strip away the layers of her own fear and show him the vulnerable, broken person underneath the billionaire facade. Because I was drowning, too, she said, her voice gaining a desperate strength. She walked towards his unmoving back. You think you're the only one who's been struggling? I have been so alone, Arthur. I live in a giant, empty house filled with ghosts. I'm surrounded by people who want something from me, who see me as a brand, a bank account, a CEO. No one sees me. Her voice cracked. And then I met you. You, with your worn-out boots and your last bread roll. You saw me. You and Lily. You were the first breath of fresh air I've had in a year. You were real. And I was so terrified that if you knew who I was, that reality would vanish. That you would start to see the money, too. And I was right. The accusation in her last words hung in the air. He was doing exactly what she had feared. He was judging her for her wealth, just as she had been afraid he would. The silence stretched, thick with pain and misunderstanding. The test of their bond had arrived, a crucible of pride, hurt, and the vast, intimidating power of money. The bridge between them was in ruins, and it seemed impossible that it could ever be rebuilt. Arthur remained at the window, his heart a confused, aching mess. He was grateful, angry, humbled, and humiliated all at once. He heard the sincerity in her voice, the raw pain, but his own hurt was a roaring fire that consumed everything else. He didn't know how to cross the chasm that had opened between them. He didn't even know if he wanted to. All he knew was that the simple, hopeful world he had started to build with Eleonora had been a fantasy, and the reality was a place he didn't think he could ever belong. The days that followed were a strange, sterile limbo. Lily, under the expert care of Dr. Finch and his team, began to recover rapidly. The color returned to her cheeks, her breathing eased, and her bright, infectious energy slowly started to flicker back to life. She loved her fancy hotel room, and the nurses who doted on her. For her, it was an adventure. For Arthur, it was a gilded cage. He barely left Lily's side, his world shrinking to the confines of the hospital suite. He was polite but distant with Eleonora when she visited. He thanked her for the updates from the doctors, for the toys she brought for Lily, for the food that appeared as if by magic. But the warmth was gone. He treated her with the formal, careful deference of an employee to a benefactor, and it broke her heart a little more each time. He was meticulously keeping a notebook, writing down every single expense he could think of, the estimated cost of the room, the doctor's fees, the price of the medicine. He was determined to honor his word, to pay her back, even if it took him the rest of his life. It was a shield of pride, the only thing he felt he had left. Eleonora, in turn, gave him space. She saw his pain and his pride, and she knew that pushing him would only make him retreat further. She poured her energy into ensuring Lily had the absolute best of everything, but she felt his emotional distance like a physical barrier. The chasm between them seemed to widen with each passing day. The true architects of the bridge, however, had not given up. The children, unaware of the adult complexities swirling around them, only knew that things felt wrong. Leo, visiting with his mother, could feel the tension. "Mommy, why is Mr. Arthur sad?" he asked one afternoon in the hallway after a particularly strained visit. "Lily is better now. He should be happy." "It's complicated, sweetie," Eleonora said, stroking his hair, her own heart aching. "Sometimes grown-ups get their feelings hurt." "Did you hurt his feelings?" Leo asked, with the direct, innocent perception of a child. "I think," she said softly, "we hurt each other's feelings." The catalyst for change came not from a grand gesture or a dramatic speech, but from a piece of paper and a crayon. Lily had been drawing, as she often did. She sat propped up in her hospital bed, a box of crayons spread around her, her tongue sticking out in concentration. When she was finished, she held it up for her father to see. It was a simple drawing, lopsided and full of cheerful, impossible colors. On the left, she had drawn a stick figure with a mop, labeled Daddy. Next to him was a smaller figure with a bright pink dress, me. On the right was a tall, elegant figure in a blue dress, Eleonora. And beside her, a boy with brown hair, Leo. And she had drawn all four of them holding hands, under a giant, smiling yellow sun. "It's our family," she announced proudly. Arthur's throat tightened. He took the drawing from her, his calloused fingers tracing the waxy lines. It was so simple, so pure. There were no dollar signs, no mansions, no janitor's closets. There was just them. For people, connected. "It's beautiful, sweetie," he managed to say, his voice thick. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Arthur sat holding the drawing. He looked at the smiling stick figures, and for the first time since the revelation, he allowed himself to feel something other than anger and humiliation. He felt the echo of the happiness he had felt on those Saturdays in the park. He remembered Eleonora's laugh, the sadness in her eyes, the way she looked at her son with a fierce, protective love that he recognized in his own heart. He thought of her words, "I was drowning, too." He had been so wrapped up in his own wounded pride that he hadn't truly listened. He had accused her of seeing him as a charity case, but wasn't he doing the same to her? Wasn't he reducing her to a single label, billionaire, and refusing to see the lonely, grieving woman underneath? He was judging her for her wealth, the very thing he had accused her of doing to him for his poverty. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His pride wasn't a shield, it was a blindfold. The next day, he made a decision. He needed to see her, not in the sterile, charged environment of the hospital, but in her world. He needed to understand. He asked one of the nurses if they could tell Mrs. Sterling he needed to see her at her home. That evening, a car was sent for him. He left Lily in the care of her favorite nurse and was driven to an address in the city's most exclusive district. The car pulled through towering iron gates and up a long, winding driveway to a house that was less a home and more a palace. It was a modern masterpiece of glass and stone, beautiful but cold, looming silently against the twilight sky. The sheer scale of it was intimidating. The old feelings of inadequacy started to creep back in. But he clutched Lily's drawing, now carefully folded in his pocket, and forced himself to walk to the front door. A butler let him in. The inside was vast, minimalist, and eerily quiet. It felt like a museum, not a home. Sounds echoed in the cavernous space. He was led to a room Eleonora called her study. She was standing by a fireplace, looking small and fragile in the immense room. "Arthur," she said, her voice uncertain. He didn't speak at first. He just looked around the room. On a large, polished desk, there was a single, silver-framed photograph of her and a handsome, smiling man, her late husband. On the walls were priceless works of art. But there was no clutter, no life, no lopsided clay pots with cheerful daisies. There was just wealth and space and a profound, aching silence. He finally understood. This was her prison. This magnificent, empty house was the cage she had described. He walked over to her, stopping a few feet away. He slowly unfolded the piece of paper from his pocket and held it out to her. She took it, her brow furrowed in confusion. She looked at the crayon drawing, at the four stick figures holding hands under the smiling sun. Her breath hitched. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Lily drew it. Arthur said, his voice quiet and rough with emotion. "She calls it our family." He finally met her eyes, and for the first time in days, the wall between them was gone. He saw her, the real her, the lonely widow, the struggling mother, the woman he had come to care for so deeply. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words were not about money or pride. They were an apology for his blindness, for his anger, for not seeing her pain. "I was wrong. I let my pride get in the way. I wasn't seeing you. I was just seeing all of this." He gestured to the grand, empty room. Eleonora looked up from the drawing, her gray eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'm sorry too," she whispered. "I should have told you. I was a coward. I was just so afraid of losing the one good thing that had walked into my life." He closed the small distance between them, and, for the first time, he initiated a touch. He gently placed his hand on her arm. The contact was electric, a current of forgiveness and understanding passing between them. "Can we?" he started, his voice hesitant. "Can we try to rebuild that bridge? For them?" He nodded towards the drawing she still held. She looked at the simple, colorful picture, a powerful symbol of a future they could have. A future built not on money or status, but on connection. A found family. A smile, the first real, hopeful smile he had seen on her face in days, bloomed. "Yes," she said, her voice full of a hope she thought she had lost forever. "I'd like that more than anything." In the quiet of the vast, lonely mansion, holding a child's simple drawing, The billionaire and the janitor finally, truly, found each other again. 6 months later, the city was waking up to a crisp spring morning. The air, fresh with the promise of new beginnings, drifted through the open window of a bright, spacious kitchen. The sound of laughter echoed in the room, a warm and joyful sound that had become the house's heartbeat. It wasn't the cold, silent mansion, nor was it the cramped, one-bedroom apartment. It was a home, a beautiful brownstone in a family-friendly neighborhood, chosen not for its prestige, but for its proximity to a good school and a large park. In the kitchen, Arthur, now wearing a chef's apron over his regular clothes, was flipping pancakes. Lily and Leo, perched on stools at a large kitchen island, were in charge of decorations, armed with bowls of berries and squirt bottles of chocolate sauce. Eleonora sat at the island with them, sipping coffee, a look of serene happiness on her face that made her look younger, softer. The hollowed-out grief in her eyes had been replaced by a warm, steady light. The change in their lives had been gradual, natural, and profound. After their reconciliation, they had made a pact to be completely honest with each other. They talked for hours, laying bare their fears, their hopes, their pasts. They learned to navigate the strange new landscape of their lives together. Arthur had been adamant about not accepting handouts. He didn't want her money. He wanted her. He wanted to be her partner, not her dependent. Eleonora, understanding his need for dignity and purpose, had respected that. But she had also seen the intelligence and quiet ambition in him that his janitorial job had never allowed to flourish. She discovered he had a passion for woodworking, a skill he'd learned from his father but had never had the time or resources to pursue. With her encouragement and a modest business loan, a formal, contracted loan he insisted on paying back with interest, he had started his own small business. He now crafted beautiful, bespoke furniture in a workshop he had built in the garage. His hands, once calloused from mops, were now calloused from chisels and saws, and he came home each day tired but fulfilled, smelling of sawdust and accomplishment. He had paid off the first installment of Lily's medical bills to the Sterling Foundation, a symbolic act that was deeply important to him. Eleonora had quietly arranged for the foundation to use his payment to fund care for another family who couldn't afford it, turning his act of pride into a cycle of generosity. "Pancakes are ready," Arthur announced, sliding a golden brown stack onto each of their plates. The children descended upon them with gusto, creating chaotic, delicious masterpieces. "Leo, you have chocolate on your nose," Lily giggled, dabbing at his face with a napkin. "You have a blueberry on your cheek," he retorted, and they dissolved into another fit of laughter. Eleonora watched them, her heart full. This was the wealth she had been missing. This noisy, messy, beautiful life. It wasn't about the absence of hardship. They still had their challenges, their moments of grief for the partners they had lost. But now, they didn't have to face them alone. They were a team, a family. Later that day, they went to the park, the same park where it had all begun. As the children ran ahead to the swings, Arthur and Eleonora walked side by side, their hands brushing against each other. "Do you remember that first night?" Arthur asked, his voice soft. "On that bench right over there. How could I ever forget?" she said, smiling at the memory. "You and your last bread roll. You saved us in more ways than one that day, Arthur Vance." "I think," he said, his gaze warm and full of love as he looked at her, "we saved each other." He reached out and took her hand, their fingers lacing together naturally, perfectly. It was no longer a tentative touch, but a confident, loving clasp. They sat on their bench, watching their children play under the spring sun. They weren't a billionaire and a janitor anymore. They were just Eleonora and Arthur, a man and a woman who had found love in the most unexpected of places. They had built a new family from the broken pieces of their pasts, creating something stronger and more beautiful than what had come before. The final scene is a simple one. The four of them are walking home as the sun sets, casting long shadows on the pavement. Leo is riding on Arthur's shoulders, and Lily is holding Eleonora's hand. They are laughing about something silly, their voices mingling in the quiet evening air. It's a portrait of ordinary happiness, made extraordinary by the journey it took to get there. True wealth, the narrator would say, isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the square footage of your house. It's measured in moments, in shared laughter, in comforting hands, in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you are loved. It's found in the courage to be vulnerable, the grace to forgive, and the simple, profound power of a single act of kindness, a gift freely given with no expectation of return. For Arthur, Eleonora, Lily, and Leo, their fortune wasn't in the sterling empire. It was right here, on a quiet street, walking home together. They were the richest family in the world. The story of Arthur and Eleonora teaches us a powerful truth. The greatest treasures in life are not the ones we can buy, but the ones we can give. A simple act of kindness, offered without expectation, has the power to ripple outwards, changing lives in ways we can never predict. Arthur, a man with almost nothing, gave his last meal, an act of pure compassion. That single gesture pierced through the walls of wealth and loneliness that surrounded Eleonora, reminding her of the human connection she had been starving for. Their story reminds us that beneath the labels society places on us, rich, poor, powerful, humble, we are all just people. We all experience fear, grief, and loneliness. And we all have a deep, fundamental need for love, connection, and family. Sometimes, the family we find is the one we build ourselves from the most unexpected pieces. It's a reminder to look past the surface, to see the person and not their circumstance. It challenges us to ask ourselves, what is our true wealth? Is it in what we accumulate for ourselves, or in what we share with others? The most valuable thing you can ever give someone is your time, your empathy, and your kindness. It costs nothing, but its value is immeasurable. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please remember to like this video, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us of the goodness in the world. What was your favorite moment in the story? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Until next time, be kind to one another.